in order to guard against and to reject the heretical and sinful instrumentalization of the Christian faith and of the Church's spiritual and canonical tradition, we should never separate the mystical, contemplative, transfigurative, theophanic core of our faith from its ethical manifestation. And this is what we see in all the witnesses to this life that we are all thirsting for. Those whom the psalmist calls the generation of those that seek the face of the God of Jacob.
I think most people know that I am Father Marcus Birch. I am the rector of St. John of the Ladder Orthodox Church here in Greenville, the longtime rector. People ask me, Father Marcus, how long have you been at St. John of the Ladder? And I usually respond, a lot of people are thinking too long. But here I am after having been assigned to this mission back in 1999, and it's gone by in the blink of an eye. We were hoping by this time that our parish hall would be finished. We were hoping that our porches would be on our building. We weren't hoping that our beautiful iconography program would be complete. We're very happy with where it stands, and I will just give a preview. Seraphim O'Keefe, who is our iconographer, will, after Vespers tonight and during the barbecue, probably lead just whoever would like around and give a little bit of a introduction to the icon program, so keep that in mind. If you have any other questions about our building project here, I'm glad to try to answer them as we move through the week. I'm here, though, now primarily to introduce our speaker, Father Bogdan Bucur, who is going to speak on the topic of theophany and its ethical trace, learning from the patriarchs, prophets, and a Jewish convert. So Father Bogdan is Romanian by birth. He came to the U.S. in 2000 to study under now Archbishop Alexander. He taught for 13 years at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh and is now at St. Vladimir Seminary, where he is the Professor of Patristics. He's a priest in the Antiochian Archdiocese. He's married to Christina. They have 3 children, 2 of which are here attending the assembly. So that's all the sort of formal stuff, but I know what you really wanted to hear this afternoon was how his students on Rate My Professor have spoken of him. So I'm going to read a couple of these because I always find this interesting. So this was from a student who took one of his classes. Dr. Bucur is a fantastic professor, and I love taking his course. I wasn't looking forward to taking a theology class, but he does a really great job with the subject. I never felt like he was preaching to me or overly forceful in theological beliefs. Take good notes and you'll do fine on the essays. Great class, awesome professor. Another one, he is very knowledgeable about his subject. The lectures are very interesting. However, there is only a few grades, we need to work on some grammar here, in the class, and the outline quizzes are pretty tricky. Take note, all of you, if you don't take very detailed notes. Also 2 papers, not a bad class, but also not the best. He teaches a very easy class that I would recommend taking if you need a core theology. His lectures can be very interesting, though sometimes it takes a long time for him to portray a certain idea. He's extremely caring and willing to give students extra time to complete their papers. That's true. So here we are, Father Bogdan. I've laid bare all of your secrets before your assembled crowd today. We are, though, grateful for you being here, the time you spent with us yesterday, and glad to have you here these next few days. So without any further ado, Father Bogdan Bucur. So,
thank you. I'm grateful for the invitation to come and to reflect with all of you on the theme of theophany God made manifest, in other words. This is, I'm sure you're aware of this, this is one of the themes very dear to our Archbishop and teacher. And to illustrate this point, which is simply a summary of our tradition, I have a quote here. This is exactly what you would find in the hymns, in the Fathers, that Theophany permeates the Orthodox tradition throughout, informing its dogmatic theology and its liturgy. That Jesus, Mary's son, is the very one who appeared to Moses and to the prophets. This is the consistent witness of the ante-Nicene Fathers and remains foundational throughout the 4th century Trinitarian controversies and the later Christological disputes. With this quotation, I confess that anything I say is really unoriginal. I had the fortune to come to this country in order to study with now Archbishop Alexander, and everything I learned of value, I learned from him. And the rest of the things that you won't like are my contribution. But I try to take as guides, I said, the patriarchs, the prophets, and the Jewish convert, because these witnesses have something in common. The psalmist calls them the generation of those that seek him, that seek the face of the God of Jacob. Or if you read the slightly trickier Masoretic text, the generation of those who in some way are Jacob, seeking the face of God. At any rate, this striking verse becomes even more potent when we read it within its context. Of course, I don't have this text here. Who shall ascend into the mountain of the Lord? And who shall stand in his holy place? He that has clean hands and a pure heart, he shall receive a blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek after him, that seek the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your gates, O princes, and be lifted up, everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall enter. Who is this, the King of glory? Regardless of how we read this line about the face of the God of Jacob, or Jacob, the face of God, or we are Jacob, it has something to do with Jacob seeking the face of God and receiving a blessing. And it has to do with the Lord of glory and recognizing him. Also with ascending with the mountain of God, the holy place, doors being opened, entering if one is pure in heart and pure in deeds. And all of this the Holy Fathers understand in reference to Christ, the crucified Lord of glory, as St. Paul teaches us. And the face shining forth both on Tabor and on Sinai, and in the hearts of those who, like Abba Pamvo of old, have recovered the icon of Adam's glory. This is the stuff that makes the gospel compelling to me, and I'm sure to you and many, many others. And it is the only reason I find for being a student of theology. And the reason I'm happy to be here with you, of course, dear Vladimir, with His Grace also Bishop Gerasim, and with the clergy and the laity of this blessed eparchy. I must say, however, that after feeling very excited at first when I was told that I'm invited to come and give a talk about something about theophany, you know, that kind of stuff, what the Archbishop likes, what the Archbishop preaches, what the Gospel says, really, the Theophania stuff and all that jazz. I was very excited. But I started to get more and more disenchanted with the theme, the more I reflected on how to put together this lecture. Because today, as we gather as Orthodox clergy and laity to reflect on the theme of God made manifest, the largest portion of the Orthodox Commonwealth worldwide is embroiled in a sort of internal war, a civil war you might call it, which is an abomination before the Lord, whose most visible feature, aside from the crimes and the millions of victims and the rapid descent into inhumanity, the most visible feature is the de facto apostasy of those hierarchs who give their blessing to this abomination, and who in this way plant the seeds of apostasy in the generation that follows after ours. So what standing do we have today as Orthodox to lecture others, or even to talk among ourselves about the mystical theology of the Eastern Church, to quote the title of Vladimir book, or the transfigurative vision of God and the theophanic heart that gives Christianity its meaning and its power? If it is not abjectly hypocritical to drone on about mystical ascent to the heights of contemplation when we have yet to learn the basics, the ABC of the faith. Do not lie, do not steal, do not take in vain the name of the Lord. It is at very least frivolous. And so I thought, well, my Theophanies, I don't know what to do with this, but maybe find something useful. And so I've asked Father Marcus to send everyone a text by the Romanian theologian, Father Dumitru Stăniloae. It's a text that you have or you will receive, a few pages. I would say a bit of an odd piece, because in a way it's not what one would expect from him. With a strange title, at least in English. It says Tenderness and Holiness. But it is telling that after translating countless texts from the ascetical tradition, and himself meeting a good number of extraordinary monastics, hermits, wandering charismatics, as well as saintly confessors with whom he had, I don't want to say the privilege, but anyway, with whom he shared good years of political prison. So in the midst of ideological betrayals of the faith from both the right and then the left, followed by decades of persecution in which we were all subjected to a meticulous program of dehumanization, in the midst of this fiery furnace, as it were, Stăniloae finds it important to sketch out the human portrait of holiness, the human embodiment of theophany, insisting on, as it were, the ethical trace of seeking the face of God and becoming the very place, the living frame of theophany. So I hope it will be a useful read for all of us. I found it very helpful precisely when I was stuck, as I told you, and I was helped also by the figure and witness of Father Nicolae Steinhardt. He is the Jewish convert that is mentioned here in the title, a contemporary of Stăniloae's, and somebody who was perhaps even more exemplary Christian in the deepest moments of persecution. I'll speak about him on Thursday. What I took away is that in order to guard against and to reject the heretical and sinful instrumentalization of the Christian faith and of the Church's spiritual and canonical tradition, we should never separate the mystical, contemplative, transfigurative, theophanic core of our faith from its ethical manifestation. And this is what we see in all the witnesses to this life that we are all thirsting for. Those whom the psalmist calls the generation of those that seek the face of the God of Jacob. So, back to theophanies then, because we must, and there is no other way. And among those who sought the face of God, we must start, of course, with Jacob himself. And with a text that is very well known, but remains, even though it is a very well known text, very enigmatic. It's something there's a lot that's been written about this text, and it still preserves some aura of mystery and incomprehensibility to some extent. It is one of those instances, many instances, in which God speaks to Jacob in visions of the night, it says. And he keeps appearing to Jacob because Jacob is not like Abraham. He does not listen, and he won't stop scheming, resisting, negotiating, manipulating. And he doesn't start out as Abraham. And so in a way, this is someone we have a bit more in common, at least in the beginning of his life. As you read through the Jacob cycle, you keep wondering, why are we still reading about this guy? Because it's atrocious what he's doing. His passion for being the first, even though he isn't, overwhelms, and he betrays his brother, and he does everything that you wouldn't imagine Abraham would ever do. Abraham listens, Jacob does not. Abraham is generous and welcoming. Jacob extorts his very own brother. And in the end, in his dysfunctional family, he schemes against his very own father, and on his deathbed lies to him, tricks him, and steals his brother's firstborn. Thank you. I'm sorry, it will happen from time to time. And God tries to manifest himself to him. So there's plenty of theophanic stuff, as it were, with Jacob. The ladder, the encampment, extraordinary stuff. And after each of these events, you see Jacob praying. But his prayers are not very pious. We have better prayers than he does. Because he keeps saying, yes, if the Lord will give me, and if the Lord will help me, and if this and that, then I might, not quite, I will. But what the meaning is, then I might make Yahweh my God. But let's see. So he negotiates. Even when he says, he starts to see the light and he says, I am not the greatest, and it's true that you've been merciful to me when I did not deserve it, and everything I have is your blessing and your gift. Still, his great concern is, but rescue me from my brother. Because, of course, as you know, his brother is in hot pursuit of Jacob. And Jacob is living with the fear that his brother will one day catch up with him. And every time you see these kinds of prayers, you realize that Jacob is actually unwilling to bend the knee, and that God cannot get through to him. Just like with Cain. God speaks to him, God tries, God assures him, all can be well, but he has to bend to Cain's free will. Also with Jacob. But he keeps pursuing, God keeps pursuing Jacob. Until we get to this text. This, I think, is the third major theophany. As you know, 3 is the charm. So you begin the reading expecting that something will happen. And it's an odd kind of text. Because Jacob was left alone. Except that he's not alone. All of a sudden you realize he's alone, but he's not alone. There is someone there. And we don't know what to make of this presence. Is it a real physical presence? Though we have read he was alone. Or is it, as a Jewish writer, Flavius Josephus, says, a phantasm? It doesn't mean something unreal. He means something on the order of a ghost or something like this. There is this little poem that some of you might know. Yesterday upon the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd go away. So was it or wasn't it a real thing? Because it looks scary, even creepy. There's some sort of an ambush you would expect, as some critics say, from some kind of deity, some kind of demon at night. That would make more sense. Except that Jacob concludes, I have seen the face of God. But then again, can you trust Jacob? The character Jacob. Would you think he is a trustworthy interpreter of his own experience? God knows what he's understanding, what he's thinking. So since we don't have access to his experience, we want to be a bit skeptical and just wait. He says he saw the face of God. But if it is God that he's wrestling with, why does it take so long? It takes the entire night. And then again, if it is God, why is Jacob victorious? Because Jacob has him pinned down. And if it is God, why is God begging him to be released? And what does God have to do with fearing the dawn? I'm Romanian, and I'm proud to say that I have on my father's side Transylvanian ancestry. So I know who is afraid of the dawn. I did not say it. So there is this ambiguity. In the end, who wins this wrestling match? Jacob or his opponent? And if it is Jacob that wins, why is it Jacob that begs for a blessing? It's just not making much sense. It's incoherent at every turn of the story. So he is victorious, but he is also humbled. And he leaves the place bearing a new name, which should tell us something about his adversary, who changes names, and therefore who redefines a human being and his or her destiny, but God. But he limps away. So it's a blessing that comes with some violence. Maybe the language that Jacob understands. At any rate, he comes out of this wrestling match bound up in covenant with the Lord he had been keeping at bay for a long time. Maybe this is the meaning of this wrestling match taking so long. But still, we don't know whether this was a physical thing or if it was something else. Maybe because we don't have the right categories, because we don't know how to name this. At any rate, it doesn't help again that a few chapters later, reflecting on all those instances in which he has been interacting in this way with God, Jacob says, "The angel who from my youth has been saving me." This is in the context of Jacob praying over the sons of Joseph. He blesses them, and he says it's the angel who has been with him all times that should bless these lads. And this created a big problem, because we want to know, did you see God face to face, or was it an angel? And if you go to find what Hosea said, again, it's not very useful. He became strong against God and became strong together with an angel. And here the problem is, wait, first of all, God or angel? And secondly, what does it mean? Against and with. With an angel, against God, what sense can this make? So this the series of ambiguities, let's say, in the text, has given rise to very many and very interesting interpretations. Some have even said, both Jewish and Christian interpreters, that perhaps Jacob was not only not alone, but that the space was pretty crowded. In other words, there was some kind of divine presence with him, not wrestling with him, but assisting him in his wrestling against evil, against his own passions. Both Philo and in our tradition, St. Ambrose, for instance, emphasize this. Yes, the wrestling is about fighting the passions. It's about purification from the many things he needs to be purified of, Jacob. And you can't do this by yourself. You need divine assistance. Hence, the angel was together with him. Others say, well, how should we interpret? This is a funny aside, or I take it to be funny. The Jewish tradition that says, well, we know why it is that this angel had to leave in the morning. He had to leave in the morning because angels have to be before the divine throne every morning. So he couldn't be late for his liturgical service, as you can't be late for matins. And that's the reason why he had to go away. That's all kinds of traditions have flourished. But in our case, we have tradition after tradition after tradition that really finds this face of God motif extraordinarily important. And I have here two texts, the kind of text that I'm sure Vladika speaks about often, because his students have learned it from him. It's a pseudepigraphon, a Jewish text interpolated and used by Christians, used for many, many, many centuries, which we have now in Slavonic, the Slavonic Enoch, or Second Enoch. And then an odd Christian text, which is actually several texts. It's complicated and layered and strange theologically, but also very beautiful and valuable in many of its pieces, the Pseudo-Clementine Homilies. And finally, a trustworthy author, Clement of Alexandria. So Enoch says, I am the one who has seen the face of the Lord, like iron made burning hot by a fire, and it is brought out, and it emits sparks, and it is incandescent. Thus I saw the face of the Lord. But the face of the Lord is not to be talked about. It is ineffable, and perhaps it is even forbidden to speak about it. Nevertheless, he can't stop himself and tells us everything about that face and describes it in detail, the face, the lips, all of that. Now you see, you, my children, he says, you see the form of my body, the same as your body. But I have seen the extent of the Lord without measure and without analogy, and to which there is no end. And with this we know that we have here the portrait of someone who stands before the face of God and knows what he's talking about and would know what Jacob is talking about. A Christian text, the Pseudo-Clementine Homilies, speaks about God in an attempt to defend the Christian faith against dualism, against the notion that there is a higher God who is ineffable and completely foreign to us, and the lower God, Bible God, the Creator God, the God of matter, the God of the prophets and of the law and of Israel, whom they consider a base God, an ignorant God, an evil God. And so to guard it, or to combat this view, the discourse here emphasizes the fact that there is no other God than this God, the God of the Scriptures. And he has shape. Now I know we say that God does not have shape, but he has shape, say the Pseudo-Clementine Homilies, and he has every limb. However, only for the sake of beauty, not for use. In other words, he doesn't need a body, and he doesn't really have a body in an intrinsic fashion. But he has the most beautiful shape for us, for our sake, on account of mankind, so that the pure in heart may be able to see him. In other words, he takes on form in order to be able to become contemplated. He shows himself, this is the face that he shows to those who are pure in heart. What affection ought therefore to arise within us if we gaze with our mind on this beautiful shape? If God has no form, one cannot be attracted to the love of God, nor even deem that one can see him. So this is, you don't have to believe everything these texts are saying, but they're still useful because they guide you roughly into some important things that we tend to overlook. Note here that this word ethos is used in Greek. This is a word that can mean sight, but it can also mean form or face or appearance. And it is important because it is what the Septuagint, the Greek text uses in our Genesis 32 text about this face of God. And the place we keep saying, this is the Theophany at Peniel. Well, in the Septuagint, it's the Theophany at face of God, or maybe form of God. Ethos, too. And so bear this in mind. And finally, Clement of Alexandria, who says that our instructor, the instructor of all patriarchs and prophets and apostles and saints and ours, the instructor is the holy God Jesus, the Logos, the guide of all humanity. And he most manifestly appears as Jacob's instructor, He said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" You remember in this wrestling match, Jacob wants a definition. A name is something that defines and allows you to manipulate. This is Jacob, to manipulate that which you define, to grasp as a concept or even physically. But there is no name, he says. What is it that you ask my name? Why did he say this? Because he was as yet unnamed, the Lord God not having yet become man. Jacob called the name of the place face of God. The face of God is the Logos, by whom God is manifested. And with this is now we're on secure ground. Remember the quotation here? That Jesus, Mary's son, is the very one who appeared to plug in what you want. Abraham, Jacob, Moses, others. This is our tradition. And we see it in all kinds of texts. In Saint Justin Martyr, the philosopher and martyr, who speaks about this very clearly. In Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, a rock-solid witness to the faith and how shall I put it? A major theologian, whom I think we should read first when we begin to learn the faith. And Saint Irenaeus says, again, Moses, that is the book of Genesis, tells us how the Son of God drew near to hold converse with Abraham. And then I'm skipping. And then to Jacob, when he went into Mesopotamia, Jacob saw him in a dream standing upon the ladder. This is then the same one who spoke to him and who wrestled with him. Or the apostolic constitutions later on, he is the Christ of God. Him did Jacob see as a man, as he said, I have seen God face to face, and so forth. Perhaps the more important theological interpretation of this passage is that of St. John Chrysostom, who explains that according to his essence, in his essence, God cannot be seen, has never been seen, could never have been seen, of course. No matter how high, let's say, you are on the ladder of beings, whether you're a seraph or a cherub or a human being or anything else, God remains in his essence unspeakable because unknowable. However, he is considerate to us, and he lowers himself in all kinds of visions and adaptations to our poverty, to our weakness. And he calls this condescension, sin katavasis. He condescends as we do with our children. When we get on our fours and we speak simple words or not even words, this is, says John Chrysostom, this is what we have in this wrestling. So we shouldn't be scandalized by the fact that God should appear as if a human being, that there should be violence, that there should be this ambiguity. This is, in fact, our weakness that demands divine condescension. And all the visions of the prophets and patriarchs are visions of the divine face, which condescends, allows itself to be contemplated. The formula that I find most memorable, and maybe you can remember it because it's really, really helpful, comes from St. Hilary of Poitiers, who says the resemblance was perfect between himself after his birth and himself as he had been seen in that vision. As he was born, so he had appeared. As he appeared, so was he born. Vladimir knows that the very same thing is said by Jacob of Sarug, but we'll leave it at Hilary of Poitiers. This is a really nice encapsulation of what the common witness of our tradition is. But remember also that our text has this ending. After he's asking about the name, and he's not really giving a name, but receives the blessing that he sought after, it says, Jacob called the name of that place form of God, or face of God, or Peniel. For he said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. I say, and yet my life has been preserved because, you can't really see God and live. And in a way, something has to die, no matter what. You can't be the same. And then it says, now the sun rose onto him, for him, upon him. That's not an ambiguity, but it's a peculiar way of phrasing things, has given rise to interpretations both on the Jewish strand and on the Christian. And by the way, I should say with a bit of a polemical edge here, maybe some of you are aware of the online information over the new manual for teaching adults in the faith about the faith. There were some people who were very scandalized that an earlier version, which unfortunately was corrected, said that Judaism worships the same God as the church. Well, if you don't believe that, it's quite odd. At any rate, I'm emphasizing the fact that both in the Jewish and in the Christian tradition, this line, that the sun rose onto him, was important. In our tradition, which is the only one we're going to look at now, St. Ambrose and St. Cyril of Alexandria speak about the fact that this sun is not the sun in the morning, but rather now that Jacob has been pierced through with the presence of God and become obedient finally, and as it were signed on to this covenant, become domesticated, let's say. Now that he's an intimate one of God, the Son of Righteousness can shine over him. And who is the Son of Righteousness from Malachi but Christ? The sun rightly rose on holy Jacob. At the same time, the Son of Justice rises on any person who recognizes God, because God is the everlasting light. Or with St. Cyril, when the light of justice, that is Christ, rises in our mind and introduces his brilliance into our hearts, then we also will be waited on as noble souls and be made worthy of divine attention. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and at daybreak, he's talking about the Theophany at Peniel, at daybreak the fight ceases. So we have this way of looking at the passage. But there's one more thing in the text that is peculiar to the Christian tradition, because it is peculiar to the Greek translation of this text. And that is, if you read here, verse 31, it says, the sun rose unto him. And then you can say either that the sun rose as Jacob passes that place, or a more natural reading in the Greek would be that the sun rose onto him as form of God past Jacob. And form of God is not the name of the place anymore, but the name of that presence. Now it sounds odd, especially if you're used to reading the English translation of the Hebrew text, which is what most of us are familiar with. But I will try to show that this is extremely important to our dogmatic tradition. Everybody knows that St. Athanasius the Great is the great because he is the champion of the Orthodox faith as articulated at Nicaea, and that he spent his life defending that faith with arguments, with preaching, with his own suffering, with many exiles, as he could, like a lion. And the great Athanasius, when he's trying to explain all these complicated things about the status of the Son, how the Son is, as we all confess in the Creed, of the same essence as the Father, when he's trying to make those points, he marshals all kinds of arguments that theologians are engaging with, and that we teach in seminary, and that seminarians have to learn and have to enjoy in order to be able then to preach about those things. But St. Athanasius has in mind also our text, and I'll explain how. First, please stay awake because it's getting a bit more abstract. So St. Athanasius says, first of all, let's establish one thing. When we say the Word of God, the Logos of God, the wisdom of God, the power of God, the light of God, we don't mean there is another God. There is one God. There is a single form of the Godhead, he says. Single form of the Godhead, for which in Greek we read ethos, theotitos. Ethos, form. And these terms do not establish, as I said, a second God, but they do point to the fact that there is some kind of distinction within that one God. And that's very important to him, because the accusation was, well, if you say that the Son is of the same essence with the Father, either you put them together in such a way that there is really, there is no real distinction, and you have a sort of Father, Son, and maybe Spirit, three-faced reality. Or if you don't want to say that, like some of your colleagues, well, then you're actually establishing two gods. And I wonder then how you're not thinking that we are bound up by the Old and the New Covenant to believe in one God and to worship one God. And so Athanasius says we worship one God. There is one form of the divinity. There is a distinction, however, within this one God. And then he starts with his more metaphysical considerations. Any essence that we can think of, whether it be fire or water or whatever, any essence has its proper, its natural shining forth, manifestation, its proper power by which it is manifested and can be defined. Water is wet, fire is hot, that kind of thing. And so sunlight is luminous. Now, just as we can distinguish between sunlight and its luminosity, we say sunlight is a reality and its luminosity is a reality as well, but we don't mean that luminosity and sunlight are two things, right? There is, however, a distinction of some kind there. And so the way we distinguish between sunlight and its proper energy of being luminous, so we can distinguish between the Father and the Son. In fact, if we say that the Son is the illuminating and creative power of the Father, we are correct. But we should also say that the distinction is even smaller between the Father and the Son than between the ray of the sun and its radiance. And that, actually, helpful as it may be, might make us think, well, then, is there a sun in reality? Is there a distinction there? Because you seem to make it so tiny that there's almost no difference. And so he says, yes, the Son is one in essence with the Father. That's what we mean. But how should I explain this thing? And how does he explain it? He says, this is what the patriarch Jacob was speaking about. Having seen this radiance, patriarch Jacob was blessed by him and called Israel instead of Jacob, as the divine scriptures witness, saying, now the sun rose unto him as the form of God passed by. This was he who said, he who has seen me has seen the Father, and I in the Father, and the Father in me, and the same one who said, I and the Father are one. So in other words, if you want to understand what it means that the Son is homoousios, of the same essence with the Father, remember Jacob. Well, what was this luminous presence there that is spoken of as the Son? Now he assumes this is not the Son, this is the Son of righteousness. And he also assumes the face of God, of course, is radiant. What is it? This one that we're talking about, Christ. That is why we say, of course, he is of the same essence with the Father. He is the divine face. This it was that was seen by the patriarch Jacob. He writes in another work, as Scripture says, the sun rose unto him when the form of God passed by. And beholding this, the prophets, he's quoting Jeremiah here, the prophets say that the word of the Lord came to me. And recognizing the Father who was beheld and revealed in him, they made bold to say, the God of our fathers has appeared to me, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So, in other words, this is the subject matter of that text and of all prophetic text, all theophanic texts in the patriarchs and the prophets. And he concludes, well, if this is what we're talking about, and as you can see now we can breathe. Yes, I know Jacob. I don't need to all that fancy schmancy metaphysical stuff. I know Jacob. Well, if this is so, that is, that the Son is manifested to the patriarchs and the prophets, why do we hesitate in calling of the same essence, homoousios, the one who alone is with the Father? Why, if we perceive the fact, the scriptural reality, should we be shy in using the phrase that conveys it accurately? And I think this is very important for us as Orthodox, irrespective of whether we go to seminary and do well, or go to seminary and do poorly, or don't go to seminary at all. The point is, we all understand what the scriptures say here, that Christ, the Word of God and the face of God, wrestled with Jacob, and the same appeared to all the prophets and the patriarchs before, the one who was to be enfleshed from the Virgin Mary. As I, I remind you, the quote from our Archbishop put it very, very nicely, that Mary's son is the one who appeared. We all know this. This is the heart, the core, the fiery theophanic core of our faith, which the Creed of Nicaea simply fences around to make sure that we know where the area of where that force field is. The definitions of the faith, such as the one at Nicaea and all the later ones, are not in themselves the truth. They're pointing towards the truth. They are formulae that have to speak the language that would have been precise, the language, the conceptual language of their time, to define precisely. But to define means to fence around. But the real thing, that's towards which they point, these definitions, is what Scripture bears witness to, and which is accessible experientially to each and every Christian. And this is a good thing, because it means theology is not simply the province of abstract thinking and library chore and so forth. It is something that is for all of us, because Jacob is for all of us. I would have loved to show some icons of this encounter at Peniel, of Face of God, but this is actually a strangely underdeveloped iconographic theme for the vision of Abraham, to which we're going to go immediately. There is, very much. Those of you who perhaps have read the book by Father Gabriel Bunge on the Trinity icon, or who have seen and heard and read about this, there's nothing new there. Abundance of images. Well, for the Peniel Theophany, not so much. That is, we do have icons, we do have images, manuscript illuminations and mosaics and what have you, but they're all showing some nondescript angel. And I wanted to make this point by showing you how similar a Jewish and a Christian depiction of the same can be. So, as you can see, perfectly contemporary images, one Jewish, one Christian. And what you get from this point is that there is an encounter between two beings that look alike. It is as though Jacob meets another Jacob, maybe a better Jacob, because the face that God shows us must be a face that is comprehensible. Remember what St. Anthony the Great sees when he's in despair and asks, "What should I do to be saved?" It says he saw someone like himself, praying and working and praying and working, and then the message is, do that and you shall be saved. There's something of this kind we see in these images, because the iconographers are aware of something that we, I think, have the habit of not paying much attention to. In other words, all this theophanic business is very beautiful and true and central and important and everything you want to say. But what follows after? What becomes of Jacob after he reconciles with God? I said that he signed on to this covenant. True. And he comes out of the tent, it's in the morning, and he's limping so that he would remember what happened. And his problems are not solved, because as he comes out, who is coming after him? Who has arrived but Esau? So the day of reckoning is there. And that passage is very, very beautiful, because Jacob recognizes this is the end. I was about to quote the Doors, this is the end, my friend, and what will happen now but death? And so he has been sending gifts and has been sending messages to try to mollify his brother coming to kill him. And he's going first because he's trying to protect everybody else, but bows down 7 times. And then suddenly Scripture says that Esau runs towards him and embraces him and weeps, and they embrace like this, perhaps. And suddenly we wonder, so what was Esau thinking all this time? Were we duped into taking Jacob's perspective as true? Was Esau really coming to kill him? Had he changed his mind because of the Theophany somehow having some sort of effect on him? Or was it Jacob's perspective that we shouldn't have adopted? Maybe the world is not so sinister as Jacob sees it. We don't quite know what to make of it. But we do know that the brothers reconcile now. And it's not only Jacob reconciling with God, but Jacob reconciling with his brother. And as he does so, he, Jacob, who has just seen the face of God at the place called Face of God, and who has seen the face of God or Son of Righteousness in the Septuagint, both designating the same, pass by him. Maybe like Moses, so God passing, it's the same verb. He now sees Esau and says, I see your face as one would see the face of God. And this is quite a statement, because it says what we must conclude. This is the whole point. If you don't see the face of your brother as the face of God, then you have not seen the face of God for sure. And if you have seen the face of God, then surely you will recognize that face in your brother. And 2nd Enoch, from which we've read earlier, bragging about having seen the face of God, draws this conclusion emphatically. The Lord with his own 2 hands created mankind, and in a facsimile of his own face, that face which Jacob saw and which Enoch tells us he's seen. Well, in a facsimile of his own face, the Lord created them, both the small and the great. And whoever insults a person's face insults the face of a king, and treats the face of the Lord with repugnance. He who treats with contempt the face of any person treats the face of the Lord with contempt. He who expresses anger to any person without provocation reaps anger in the great judgment. He who spits in a person's face, you see where this is going. This sounds like Matthew 25 in a way. When have we seen you? Well, maybe you didn't know that you saw me, but you did these things, and your heart is pure. Therefore, you are the blessed of my Father. And the Pseudo-Clementine homilies, which remember went on and on about the form that God manifests in order to allow us to contemplate and to be purified, writes, He molded man in his own shape, as in the grandest seal. And anyone who wishes to worship God honors this visible image, which is humankind. Whatsoever, therefore, anyone does to a human being, good or bad, is regarded as being done to him, because God avenges his own form, his own shape. So this has some teeth, and we need to learn from it, I think, especially these days. Now, I did want to also consider this other Theophany, which is perhaps the one that we know a bit better. This is the 3 visitors appearing to Abraham, but I'm going to sidestep perhaps some of the things that we all know very, very well, that the Trinity icon and so forth. We'll show it, but dwell on something else. What's the first thing that comes to mind to early Christians as they're thinking about the Theophany? What are you thinking of first? You have an icon there. That's the icon. Yes. But early Christians, such as those in the New Testament, say, let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to welcome strangers, for this is how some have entertained angels unawares. And this is a reflection on that text. So you wonder, what comes to mind first? They say hospitality, because this is what we learn from Abraham first. He is hospitable. How hospitable is he? Well, Abraham is at the entrance of his tent, and it's midday. This is very important, as we'll see. How important is it? Well, it's the moment of supreme spiritual perception. Yes, but it is also very hot at midday. Not only is it hot, not only is Abraham suffering, he's also very old. He's 90-something. But he's also freshly circumcised, freshly self-circumcised. So he's in pain. We know that from other episodes, if not from experience, we know from other episodes where we know that this is disabling for a couple of weeks. And so Abraham is in the heat, suffering, barely able to move, and probably barely able to breathe. What does he do when he sees three men? And to him, these are three men. He doesn't know more than this. They are in a distance. He doesn't have any kind of special spiritual knowledge to tell him there's more than just three human beings suffering like he does of the same heat. What does he do? He runs to them. This is how hospitable Abraham is. And this is the stuff that imposed itself on the early Christians first. Therefore, the first interpretation of this text, be hospitable like Abraham at the cost of your health and wellness and health and wealth and that kind of thing. The second one is a tradition that was very important to Jews in dialogue with Christians, such as we have in the dialogue between Justin Martyr and Trypho the Jew. Trypho says, well, actually, look, the Lord appeared to Abraham. This is one statement. God appeared. This is the Theophany. And the three men, what about them? What about those three men? We would say, well, that's the same thing. The Lord appeared, the three men? No. Trypho, who is the Jewish conversation partner for Justin, Trypho is the opinion that there are two things. God appears and the three angels appear. God appeared to him before the vision of the three. And then those three, whom the scriptures call men, were angels. Two of them were sent to destroy Sodom, and one was sent to announce the joyful tidings to Sarah that she would bear a son. And there are all kinds of traditions in Judaism that give names to these angels. Now Justin hears this tradition and articulates his own vision, not as being his own vision. He says, this is what we believe. What do we believe? That God appears indeed, and he is not distinct from the three. It's not God and the three. He's rather one of the three. God appears with his two angelic assistants, like a king flanked by bodyguards. It's something more elevated than that. But his two angelic assistants, like a bishop led by deacons, if you want, like a candidate for ordination led to the ordination, something like this. And who is this central figure then? By this time you ought to have an answer. Yes, the answer is always Jesus, always. So then, this is how this is read for many centuries. There is also a third reading, which eventually produces our Trinity icon, and that is to say, the same reality is spoken of twice. Once, the Lord appeared to Abraham, and this is from the point of view of God, objectively as it were, Theophany. God appears, God made manifest. But how do you perceive this manifestation of God? When Abraham looks up, what Abraham sees, his perception of the Theophany, is that three men are standing near him. And this happens to be at midday. And midday is important because, sorry, I was having to skip. Because at midday, God shines around the soul, and the light of the mind fills it through and through, and the shadows are driven from it, and the rays which pour all around it, the single object presents in that at midday vision. A single object presents to it a triple vision, one representing the reality, and the other two, the shadows reflected from it, like through a prism that breaks the light. So the central being with each of its powers as his squire presents to the mind which has vision the appearance sometimes of one, sometimes of three. Of one, when the mind is highly purified. Of three, when as yet uninitiated into the highest mysteries and unable to apprehend the existent one alone by itself, but only through its powers, through its actions, either as the creative power or the ruling power. He has similar considerations about Isaiah, where the Lord stands between the two seraphs. Well, this is a tradition that became important also in our ascetical tradition. At midday signifies that this is the moment of perfect clarity, of highest perception, of highest contemplative state. So, if so, then, well, it's quite important that Abraham perceives the three as he looks at the manifestation of God at midday. But his reaction is a practical one, and this is the thing that I think we should emphasize. It doesn't work one without the other. And in fact, sensitivity, a very important sensitivity to this tension which is built into our text, is something that you find especially in the rabbinic tradition. I think we have a lot to learn from the rabbinic tradition in this respect. The sentence is here in this third text. Hospitality to wayfarers is greater than welcoming the presence of God. For it is written, Abraham said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, pass not away, but enter to your servant." And Rabbi Eleazar said, "Come and see how the conduct of the Holy One, blessed be He, is not like the conduct of mortals. The conduct of mortals is such that an inferior person cannot say to a greater man, 'Wait until I come to you.' Whereas in the case of the Holy One, blessed be He, it is written, He said, 'My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight.'" In other words, what happens when God appears? The interpretation that they give, and this is an interpretation for pastoral use, which I think we can borrow. So when God appears, what should we do? Should we welcome God when at the same time there is the pressing need, the three men in the heat? Or can we tell God to wait until we go and take care of the poor? In other words, what is more important, hospitality or liturgy? Contemplation or action? If you put it in these terms, this is a tension we're very uncomfortable with. And the answer is, of course, hospitality, because that is the condition for proper liturgy. This is how Abraham sees the God who has appeared. If he had said, "Forget the three, God has appeared, I'm busy," he would have missed out on that contemplation. Now, this is granted. This is not something that we can go further in, because we have, in fact, theologically more potent things in this text, as you see in these images. That we speak about Christ appearing to Abraham and receiving the hospitality of Abraham, which he then repays at the Last Supper when he washes the feet of the disciples. This is a beautiful tradition that we have also among the fathers, and that even in the Trinity icon, it is Christ still who is the central figure, even though the way in which this icon is painted shifts the attention to the figure to the left. But nonetheless, this is an icon of Christ, and it was designed as an icon of Christ. And these two readings, Christological and Trinitarian, are complementary on two different levels of symbolization. But more importantly, any of these two readings, Christological or Trinitarian, should not be detached from the ethical trace that they leave with Abraham and then also with us. And the really difficult portion of this vision is what follows after. What follows after is that two of the three depart. Where are they going? Sodom. They're very busy because things are going on in Sodom that demand attention. And the text says, one second. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham has now become a friend of God, right? So then God discloses to him things that he discloses to the angels, his plans. So then, shall I hide from Abraham? Surely not. Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him. No, I have chosen him that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. And so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. And then the Lord mentions the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, great, and their sin very grave. I shall go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. And so the two men go to Sodom and Gomorrah, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Now, to stand before the Lord is a very strong expression of contemplation. What do you do when you're before the Lord? What would you want if you were before the Lord? What would you ask for if you had an audience with God? Undisturbed 15 minutes, not with the bishop, not with the metropolitan, God himself. What would you do in that time? What mysteries would you want revealed? This is the stuff that teaches us what sort of contemplation is genuine. And then Abraham drew near and said, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous and the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of the earth do right? And the Lord said, if I find 50 righteous, I will spare the city. And Abraham continues, behold, I have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. I am but dust and ashes, and still I speak. Suppose 5 of the 50 are lacking. Will you destroy the city for 45? And he said, I will not destroy for 45. Again he spoke to him. Suppose 40 are found. He answered, for the sake of 40 I will not do it. Then he said, let the Lord not be angry. I will speak again. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, behold, I have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. You realize he's brown-nosing at this point, big time. Instead of contemplation, he's occupied with the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody knows how terrible they are, and of all the people, he knows best. It's not that far, and he has family there, so he knows. Why would he waste his time on them? For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Oh, let the Lord not be angry. I will speak once again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy them. And then the Lord leaves. But the rabbinic text, actually, it's an older pre-rabbinic text. It's a Targum, a translation with interpretation, with paraphrase, continues this thing and says, well, it's not only Sodom and Gomorrah. There are actually the 5 cities, and we don't have enough people, righteous people, to cover, as it were. What do you do if you don't have 5 people for the 5 cities? 3 for 5. How about 2 for 5? This is like a bazaar, a negotiation. And it goes on and on and on and on. And the point is that Abraham will not relent and will keep doing this and drive this bargain again, again, again. And God keeps doing this as well. And so, what is it that moves Abraham to do this thing? What do we call it? Sorry? Yes, but it's a weird kind of thing, because why do this thing during his allotted time standing before the Lord? This text speaks about Abraham. And I've repeatedly pointed you to the fact that Abraham has a specific kind of relation with God that informs his relation with his brothers. All of them, including those in Sodom and Gomorrah. And that he will not let go. Remember, this is Abraham who, when he's told, take your son, your only son, the one you love, the one I mean. Not Ishmael, but Isaac. And bring him as a burnt offering. Doesn't say anything. Well, now he has a voice. And he has chutzpah, right? He dares to push back against God. So I should ask, who is more merciful, God or Abraham? God, who goes hulk and wants to destroy everything? Or Abraham, who tries to stay his hand? Why would God be more merciful, Father?
He stays
Yes, I suppose he could wipe out Abraham because he's so annoying. Sorry?
merciful enough to let a man change his mind.
This is very, very, very tempting. Because the reality is that Abraham would not have spoken had God not told him what the plan was. Because it is God who elevates him to the status of an angel, in the sense that you're Abraham, you're important, covenant, all of that. So should I not disclose to you, important Abraham, the plans? It's God who gives him that platform, that podium, to test him. Just as he tests him with Isaac. Whether he believes that that covenant is trustworthy enough that Isaac will live even though he might die. In neither case, Isaac will live because the covenant is about descendants. So also here there's a test. So what do you do with your contemplation? What do you occupy? What do you fill it with? And what does covenant mean for your relations with the others? And if Abraham had said, yes, Lord, in fact, Sodom and Gomorrah is not enough. Let's go San Francisco. If he had done so, I think he would have not passed the test. And Abraham would not have been the one that we always remember so fondly and in whose bosom we want to be, we and those whom we love. And this is, I think, something we ought to also keep in mind when we talk about Abraham and the way in which he interacts with God. Because his contemplation, that encounter with God, that theophany, leaves a very specific kind of trace. And it's the same thing that we will see with Jacob. In fact, we have seen because we started with Jacob. And it's the same thing that you also see with Moses. When Moses is told, how about we wipe out Israel? Because look, they are worshiping the golden calf, and I haven't even had the chance to disclose, before you even go to disclose how to worship me, they worship the golden calf. Look what they're doing. let my anger burn, wipe them out, and we start again with you. And I will make you, Moses, because you're special and important, a new nation and everything fine with you. What does Moses say? Yes, Lord, let's go to other places as well. What's his reaction? Now Moses is someone who comes back from the mountain shining because he has met God. But what does he do? He speaks back. And this time it's not out of stubbornness like at the burning bush. Just send somebody else, I don't want to do this job. This time he has, like Jacob, become a friend of God, also like Jacob in the course of a pretty violent theophany. Remember when God is leaving him dangling out the window, like in the mafia movies, is trying to kill him, and he's saved yet again by a woman, by his wife. Well, Moses is now obedient, faithful, meek, the meekest. And still he stands up to God and says, well, then wipe me out also. And intercedes. Now, this is the job of a Christian, generally, of any Christian. This is the job of a priest. This is the job of a bishop. This is the job of the church for all its members and for the entire world. And this is the measure of whether we are faithful to our own tradition or whether we betray it in favor of some sort of convenient theophany-centered spiritualism, which is fake, because it is not what we see in the patriarchs or the prophets, or certainly in our Christian tradition. Now, if this seems a bit abstract, I will ask you to read the pages from Staniloae, and if you have the time and the pleasure to also come back Thursday to hear about Father Nicolae Steinhardt, who has both the sensitivity of a Jewish convert and the instruments of a hyper-cultured person, and the zeal of a convert, and the mystical experience of divine light that we will talk about next time. Thank you very much for your patience. Well, I would wholeheartedly second you when it comes to our liturgical text, because, if we keep reminding God that He's actually merciful, it's not really that God has forgotten, but that we forget how God truly is. So I do find it very useful to remind myself and then remind others at services that when we say, for you are a good God and you love mankind, yes, this is important to remember that God is good and loves mankind, because very often the gospel is distorted and made into some kind of abomination. So yes, we're reminding ourselves as we seem to be reminding God. There was a question here, yes? But we don't know everything. The fact is, this is a story that ends with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And my point was simply, we should not put ourselves in the position of God or the angels. I took it upon myself to play that role. Basically, don't do what we just did, because our place should be the place of Abraham. Now, how God judges, what God does, is something else. What we have to do, on the other hand, is what Abraham does, what Jacob does, and I think, as you point out, this is how we become a bit godlike, because God has this infinite patience and infinite mercy. As we say in a prayer before confession, I'm forgetting. So is your mercy. Endless, overabundant. As you say, God waits on Jacob, and we lose patience as readers, thinking, why can't we just pass to someone better than this? God knows something we don't know. Same with the punishments. But we're never told to do what God did. We're always told to be like Abraham, like the Lord tells us. If you are the sons of Abraham, then do the deeds of Abraham.